But first tonight, an investigation has found the new Liberal leader, Sussan Ley, failed to declare personal expenses paid by the anti-Semitic Palestinian Authority. Her office launched an internal investigation after I discovered in January that Sussan Ley had failed to declare accommodation, meals and transport paid by the Palestinian Authority on a trip to the West Bank in 2011. Other Labor politicians who went on that trip did declare gifted meals, transport and accommodation from the Palestinian Authority, but Sussan Ley didn't. At the time, she was a strong critic of Israel. She demanded Palestinian statehood, accused Israel of occupation and even sponsored a Palestinian child. But it's her failure to declare expenses that's in breach of parliamentary guidelines. When I reported this in January, her office told me they'd launched an internal investigation. And today, just one day after she became leader, her spokesman said an administrative oversight occurred whereby Ms Ley's disclosures were not updated to reflect the fact that some accommodation, some meals and ground transport were provided by the Palestinian National Authority. In January 2025, Ms Ley formally made that declaration to the Deputy Clerk of the Parliament, and the Deputy Clerk confirmed the matter was resolved. This is highly embarrassing, having to make a declaration to the Deputy Clerk in 2025 for expenses paid by the Palestinian Authority 14 years after her trip, and only declaring this after our revelations. Treasurer Jim Chalmers this week described the Liberal leadership contest as a battle of the duds, and it's hard to disagree with him. The reality is that Labor's now sitting on some 93 seats, the Coalition on 43. It's an unbelievable 50-seat difference. And of the Coalition's 43 seats, only 28 are held by the Liberals. The challenge for the Liberal Party is monumental. It's been reduced to a shadow of its former self. It's a virtual wipeout. They need to regain credibility. They need to regain the trust of Australians. They need to regain the opportunity to govern and to claw back upwards of 30 seats. And this simply can't be done with a mediocre or untested politician. It needs an extraordinary talent, a politician who can capture the imagination of Australians, who can connect with voters and convince them to support the party. It needs to be a leader with charisma, of standout intellect, and someone who's inspiring, who has vision for our nation. There's no one like this at the moment in the Liberal Party, and there are no good options currently to lead the party in the House of Representatives. There is only one credible and genuine option if the Liberal Party ever wants to govern Australia again. And that's for the party to convince Josh Frydenberg to run again. As the Liberals have learnt in Victoria against Daniel Andrews at the last election, it doesn't matter how hopeless a government is. If the opposition isn't strong, if it doesn't provide a credible alternative, voters won't elect them. And then in terms of funding, which is essential for fighting and winning election campaigns, Frydenberg would be the best bet as well to engage donors and the business community. Because right now, Liberal donors are currently walking away from the party. They can't walk away fast enough. And you can't blame them. Who would give their hard-earned to this shambles of a party? One Liberal donor described Sussan Ley to me as a lemon. And that's brutal. But the reality is, Sussan Ley is a placeholder. She's not the answer. No one believes that the current leader will ever be Prime Minister. But her comeback story from resigning in disgrace in early 2017 is quite something. You might recall she was forced to resign from the front bench after an expenses scandal where it was revealed she bought an $800,000 Gold Coast investment unit while on a taxpayer-funded trip. This scandal emerged on the front page of the Herald Sun, where it was it was billed as a big exclusive, and it was. And Sussan Ley then resigned. But it later emerged that the entire story was the work of Labor's Dirt Unit. Sam Maiden revealed in her book, Party Animals, that Bill Shorten's Dirt Unit secretly orchestrated her downfall by leaking a dossier of travel records to newspaper outlets to engineer a political crisis. And Scott Morrison later brought Sussan Ley back to the front bench, and she's part of his centre-right faction that's led by Alex Hawke. But the main reason Sussan Ley then became deputy leader is that after the Brittany Higgins scandal and the Me Too movement, there was the perception that the coalition had a women problem. It was one of the reasons the coalition lost in 2022. So Peter Dutton, when he became leader, decided he needed a female as his deputy. And there were very limited options in the lower house. They were either new or lower profile MPs. And so it was that Sussan Ley was elevated to the senior role. But there was then a problem with her views on Israel, which were out of step with where the Liberal Party sat, and in fact with the Liberal Party's official policy position. And Sussan Ley's beliefs belonged in the Albanese left faction. I reported on this back in January this year. Sussan Ley was a pro-Palestinian advocate for some 15 years at least, before she visited Israel for less than a week in late 2022 and changed her perspective. That visit was after she became the deputy Liberal leader in the wake of the May 2022 election. And here's some of what Sussan Ley said as a lifelong Palestinian advocate.
As someone with a long-term affinity for the Palestinians, including co-chairing this Parliament's friendship group over many years, I wish to highlight the Palestinian perspective. Less than 5% would remember a time without Israeli occupation. I support the Palestinian bid for statehood in part because it will give heart to the ordinary people of the West Bank and Gaza.
And her call there in 2011 for Palestinian statehood was even to the left of the Labor Party at the time. But it was the following comments that were the most offensive, the ones I'm about to show you. They're on par, or perhaps worse, than comments made by both Albanese and Penny Wong. Again, this is from my expose in January this year. In a 2008 speech, Sussan Ley said, and I quote, "Israel has many friends in this country and in this parliament. The Palestinians, by comparison, have few. Theirs is not a popular cause, but it is one I support in part out of knowledge that the victors in World War II, including Australia, wrote a homeland cheque to cover the sins of the Holocaust and centuries of anti-Semitism in Europe, but it was the Palestinians who had to cash it." I find that particularly shocking because it feeds into the narrative that the Jews don't belong in Israel, when in fact Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel and lived there for thousands of years before Islam was even invented. And then Sussan Ley was asked about those specific comments in her press conference yesterday. She now says she had a change of heart after her trip in late 2022 when she became deputy leader of the party. And she said yesterday in her press conference that she now supports Israel, but remains a friend of the Palestinian people.
Following my appointment as deputy, I took a trip at the invitation of Julie and Lisa, an outstanding colleague and dear friend, to Israel. And I spent a lot of time seeing what was happening on the ground and the impact of that trip and the changed geopolitical circumstances of the Abraham Accords, with Israel reaching out for peace to Saudi, to Morocco, and then, of course, the hideous events of October the 7th in Gaza have changed my thinking on the entire subject.
Now, you heard there that she said the Abraham Accords were one of the reasons she changed her views, but she claimed they were with the Saudis. Well, of course, the Abraham Accords were not with the Saudis. They were with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. And Israel is still trying to do a normalisation deal with Saudi Arabia. And Trump spoke about it just today. And of course, the fact that they were on the verge of such a deal is one of the reasons why Hamas attacked Israel on October 7. But the point is, Sussan Ley changed her long-held criticism of Israel just a year or so before October 7. And she did so in order to be in line with the policy position of the Liberal Party. Now, I think it is terrific she visited Israel, that Julie and Lisa took her, and that she then changed her perspective. And we need more people who are open-minded like this. But I'm unconvinced she's best placed to lead the Liberal Party after holding views further to the left than Albanese and Penny Wong. She's also changed her views on other issues as well, like banning live sheep exports. She once argued strongly in favour of the ban for animal cruelty reasons. Now she supports the trade. This flip-flopping has led to accusations she isn't a woman of conviction, that she doesn't know what she stands for. Latika Burke in The Nightly writes that it was telling that the first note that went to journalists after Sussan Ley's victory was to clarify that Sussan Ley's last name is pronounced Lee as opposed to Ley. Latika says that so little is known about the former deputy leader, who's been in federal politics for a quarter of a century, should be of concern, particularly given that if she survives to fight the 2028 election, she'll be older than John Howard was at the time of his last win in 2004. Now, Sussan Ley also wanted to be Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs when Simon Birmingham retired. But Peter Dutton didn't think she was up to the job. He didn't think she was good enough. Yet she's now the leader of the party. Make of that what you will. But at least 25 members in the Liberal Party don't have confidence in her. And under her leadership, the party will remain divided. There will be no unity. Look, she has a tough job ahead of her, and we can only wish her luck. But if the party wants to govern again, if it wants to provide a serious alternative to the Albanese government, which actually the nation needs for democracy, then Liberal MPs and Liberal senators need to put their own egos aside and do everything they can to beg Josh Frydenberg to run again at the next election.